Joe Castiglione dropped a bomb on SEC day one. What does it mean for the Oklahoma Sooners? Coming up next on Locked On Sooners.
You are Locked On Sooners, your daily podcast on the Oklahoma Sooners. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Sooner Nation? Welcome to the SEC and welcome to Locked On Sooners. Thank you for making Locked On Sooners your first listen every single day. Free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that subscribe button and that notification bell to let you know when new episodes drop. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more as playoffs wind down. The sports stop sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I'm John Williams. You can follow me on Twitter at John9Williams. He's Jay Smith. You can follow him on Twitter at UnfairSports. And Jay, there was so much that happened on day one of Oklahoma in the SEC. But the biggest bombshell that got dropped was a part of kind of the later coverage on SEC Network where Joe Castiglione came out and said, hey, every coach that was on board with us moving to the SEC is still with us. The ones that aren't, they're not. Or the ones that weren't on board with it, they are no longer with us. And he did not name names. He did not speak specifically about any particular coach that is whether an assistant or a former head coach, but I think it's pretty safe to say this might have been a little bit of a Joe C. dig at one Lincoln Riley.
Yeah, and the way he said it, as you mentioned, this entire day has been crazy. I've been watching Feinbaum and SEC Now, and you get to see everybody on there doing their interviews and everything. And then when Joe C said that, everybody kind of looked around and started laughing. It was everybody caught the joke. Like, it wasn't one of those subtle jabs. No, it was quite blatant, because if you truly think about it, what other coaches left since we went to the SEC? We've not lost anybody. So it was pretty obvious who he was talking about, and everybody else kind of caught it. And to be honest, it feels like that was like the theme of the day, because I swear Paul Feinbaum joked about the fact that Oklahoma didn't have a defense with every single person he interviewed. So yeah, we all know exactly how everybody felt about the last regime outside of Oklahoma. So now we get to all joke together, because yeah, we're kind of the butt of the joke, but at the same time, it's just a family jab towards us while they're throwing real daggers at that former regime.
It was interesting. Dari Noka was one of those that Paul Feinbaum joked with. Noka, a OU alum, and talking about how Dari was mad about Oklahoma's defense, and he threw out the joke. Oklahoma didn't even have a defense. And hey, Oklahoma had some good defenders on some of those teams, but as a unit, we're not good enough to contend and compete with the SEC. And that brings us to Brent Venables, a guy who is Joe C's guy, a guy that they brought in with the clear understanding and clear purpose of getting this program to the capability of contending in the SEC. And Brent Venables, unlike Lincoln Riley, has leaned into every aspect of that. He's been unafraid to say that this program is doing what it has to do to develop in such a way that it can go and be competitive in the SEC. Whereas Lincoln Riley, 0-3 against the SEC in the college football playoff, tried to get out of the LSU series, got out of the Ole Miss series. And then we have this dagger from Joe Castiglione. I mean, it's pretty clear there's two very different personas and people. Brent Venables knows what it takes to be successful against the SEC, and every step he's taken along the way, whether it's on the field, on the recruiting front, in the locker room, in the resources, creating soul mission, creating recovery, everything's been about improving this program so that when they step foot on the field with the SEC, they've done everything that they could from a logistics standpoint. Now it's just a matter of development and actually going and playing the football games.
Yeah, execution is critical. And Paul Feinbaum, that was some of the things he really emphasized in a lot of his questioning around with Venables, and some of the things he actually talked about with him. He pointed out, hey, your days at Clemson, you ran a defense there. You were basically the CEO of the defense. Dabo Swinney let you do your thing. And he pointed out how his two titles came against the SEC. came against the GOAT. So you know that Venables has an idea of the structure and the way a team has to run, what type of players are needed to be successful at the highest level. Now, and Venables also pointed out, it's like, yeah, it wasn't week over week, week in and week out. We understand that going into the SEC, the physicality of this conference is going to be different compared to even to the ACC when they were running things in the Big 12 that they're just coming out of. But that doesn't mean they're not prepared. That doesn't mean that they're not focusing all efforts around recruiting on the type of players that's going to be needed. I know that everyone wants Oklahoma to have the number one class every single year. Until we walk in here and start winning championships, it's going to be tough. You're going to be battling with Alabamas and the Georgias of the world because they still have a blueprint based upon just their former track record, right? Recency bias is king, and recency bias is key. That's the one thing that a lot of people look at. And so for Oklahoma to get that, even though we've seen what Venables, Todd Bates has done over there at the Clemson era with getting those defensive linemen and stuff, they still got to show at Oklahoma that they can also bring those players in, or at least develop the ones they've got and send them off to the first round. Once that starts happening, I promise you, the floodgates will open. And yeah, you start seeing Oklahoma teeter with that 3-4 range. Now, outside of getting to that high, as you mentioned, John, the most important thing of all, execution. It's great to accumulate talent. We've seen Texas A&M get number one classes. We've seen our rival Texas get it just about every single year. They're maintaining in between the top 10, top 15. It's all about executing. So for Oklahoma, executing on that, on top of bringing in the right players, it's going to be critical moving forward.
Yeah, and I feel like they've done a great job at developing the depth chart. When Lincoln Riley left, yes, there was a lot of defensive leadership on that 2021 team, with the Nick Bonito and Isaiah Thomas and Delaran Turner-Yell. And it was a pretty solid defense because you had veteran players, but you didn't have a whole lot of depth behind those guys. But going into 2024, I feel like everybody can look at this depth chart and think, hey, it is in a much, much better place, especially along the defensive front where, hey, at defensive tackle, you've got a group of dudes that are going to be impactful, and they are SEC ready guys. They're SEC builds, dudes that are going to be able to hold up at the point of attack against some of the bigger offensive lines that they'll face. And you go 3 deep, even at nose tackle. If you have Dominic Williams and Dejon Terry and Jaden Jackson at your nose, like you can go 3 deep that with guys that are going to be over 300 pounds. And with Williams and Dejon Terry closer to 320, 330, you weren't having that 3 years ago. And so when you were going up against the SEC in the college football playoff, you weren't going to hold up against those offensive lines because you didn't have the size, the strength, and the talent to be able to do that down in, down out for 60, 70 plays. Well, now you've got depth where you can rotate 3 deep at the nose and at the defensive tackle spot with Grayson Halton and David Stone. I mean, this is a big, big group with big, big talent. And Brent Venables has got this team on a great trajectory heading into the SEC.
Yeah, Todd Bates talked about that, the first year. Actually, last season he talked about it, how the first year they came in, they had one guy over 300, right? Schmitty got some work, full year. It was a mediocre season at Sooner standards. But then the next season he came in, he had 8 guys at the 300-pound threshold, which was huge. Now, after that, most of them graduated, so it's coming in this season with only one person over 300 initially. We bring in the class, we've got the summer workouts, we brought in some transfers, and actually we're looking at, I calculated 7 players over 290 pounds right now, with 5 of those being over 300. It's looking like once fall ball hits, as long as nobody loses weight this summer in this blazing Oklahoma heat, we should walk in there with at least 7 dudes over 300 at or over 300 pounds in preparation for the season. And that was the other thing that Feinbaum even pointed out and Venables pointed out about this team, is that now they have guys that have been in this system for 3 years, right? That is so huge in the execution of your defense. We all know Venables' defense is pretty complex. That's the infamous stories of it. They throw a lot of exotic blitzes out there, and they're very aggressive, but there's a lot of moving parts with it. And so you have to be reliant on the next guy the guy next to you to do their job so you can do your job. And if one doesn't do their job, that just exploits everything. Well, now you've got players that are 3 years in the game. 3 years in the game is huge when it comes to college football. And because of that, there's a good chance, as we've been preaching for like the last few months, there's a good chance this defense shows out this year.
Brent Venables, his defensive staff, been doing work getting Oklahoma ready for this day and ready for their first season in the SEC. Another guy that's been doing work, Emmett Jones on the recruiting trail, got another big-time blue chip commitment on Monday. We'll discuss coming up next here on Locked On Sooners.
I love sports, and of course, I love them so much that I never want them to stop. But one of the problems is that now that the playoffs is winding down, they ain't gonna be sporting like we used to, right? But the good thing is FanDuel is there to give me something to do and keep me going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, and dream up anything that's going on. Right now, baseball season's going on, but since we're talking college football, been still looking at these over-under numbers, and it looks like Oklahoma's sitting at even money at that 7.5. Feels like Vegas is recognizing that. Better not doubt them Sooners. But to win the conference, it's plus 3,300. May throw a couple dollars on there so we can win that. So all summer long, FanDuel is hooking up all of our customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. They're giving you money to play. So it's something for everyone, every day, all season long. So head over to FanDuel.com/locked on and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball.
Are you watching Fox Sports or ESPN on your TV all day? Have to turn down the volume with all that shouting? Make the switch to Locked On Sports today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So Emmett Jones keeps doing work in the 2025 recruiting cycle, landing another blue chip wide receiver in Cortez Mills out of South Florida. Mills, according to Rivals, is the number 69 wide receiver in the class. He is the number 107 wide receiver, according to On3. ESPN has him as high as 114 and 247 Sports, number 196. He's the fifth highest rated commitment in the Sooners 2025 recruiting class. Keeps Oklahoma in the top 5 position right now, third in the SEC, behind only Alabama and Georgia as things stand. But you look at the wide receivers that Oklahoma's already landed. You got Cortez Mills. You got Elijah Thomas, the 4-star prospect out of Chakota, Oklahoma. You got Marcus Harris, the 4-star prospect out of Mater Dei in Santa Ana, California. And you got Grayson Harris, who is considered a 3-star prospect according to 247 Sports. He's a little bit higher rated in other places. But this thing has a national bend to it. But let's talk Cortez Mills, because that's a big time commitment. What do you like about his game? What does he bring to the table?
Yeah, looking at him, I mean, 247's composite has him as number 88 in the country. That is huge, which that means it takes all of the ratings in there. They put their formula together and give him a spot. But top 100 player in the country at wide receiver. I mean, this has been a very rich class of wide receivers. And when I watch Cortez, the one thing that jumped out to me is not only does he have a very wide catch radius, similar to Marcus Harris, but this dude is elusive, right? Once he catches it, it's hard to get him down because he's going to juke and he's going to shake you and he's going to go. So he's one of those that does a really good job of making moves in space. We're going down there to Florida taking up some guys, right? We're taking a lot of these Florida players. And as you mentioned, John, Emmett Jones is doing this at the national level. He's getting as much local talent as possible, plus he's expanding out to those players that are good. Cortez came and visit twice, right? He was at Miami a bunch. He went to Florida. Clemson was the favorite for the most of his recruitment, and we kind of got our revenge on the Brian Westcott portion of it and got ourselves Cortez Mills instead. But I think he's going to be a special talent for this class. At his height, he's about 6'1", 6'2"-ish, roughly 180. He looks like he's one that can be on the outside, and he could be the one that could be the cornerstone of your receiver room. Now that's 5 players that came in. Tells me that we're looking at having a big amount of turnover and guys going to the league at the end of this season.
Yeah, I failed to mention Emmanuel Choice, and don't let me. I'm sorry. Mr.
Oh yeah,
Choice.
Manny.
That's not somebody to sleep on, because that dude is a ball player in his own right. But on Cortez Mills, he just is a natural. He just looks naturally suited for the wide receiver position. You watch guys, and wide receiver, I don't know if you know this about me, Jay, but wide receiver is by far my favorite position to watch when I'm watching talent, watching the kids, because there's something poetic almost about playing the wide receiver position. Yes, it takes a lot of you got to have a lot of athleticism, you got to have speed, but it's poetry in motion, in my opinion. Like, you watch some of the greats, and there's just something so beautiful about the way they play the position. Sorry, I'm getting poetic here on Locked On Sooners, but we're getting there. But I watch Cortez Mills, and man, he just has a great understanding of how to play against zone coverage. He knows how to change his speeds. He's not just running one speed all the time. And when you watch the greats, that's what they do. They change speeds. They're able to rev up. They're able to utilize kind of a 75% speed to just get the cornerback kind of lulled into a false sense of security, and then they can turn it on. Well, he does a great job of that. He's got great hands, and again, has enough speed to get behind a defense. But you mentioned he could play on the outside. I think he could also play in the slot as well and be very, very effective, because he's just a smooth route runner.
Yeah, he's a natural route runner, and watching some of his film, he's getting out there and he does a really good job of extending the play, right? So when the quarterback's in trouble and they've got to scramble, he finds a way to get to those positions to help his quarterback out so they can launch it to him and he can make the catches. And then once he catches the ball, that yak is always high with him, right? He catches it. Next thing you know, he drop steps on him, or he's breaking a tackle. Yeah, he is naturally good, and I'm with you. It's very poetic watching wide receivers and corners go back and forth, because it's a dance as they both try to figure out who's doing what and what the other one is going to do, and to be able to go after him. But Cortez Mills is going to be one of those players that's going to be really, really tough to defend, just because of how talented he is. He had 79 catches for like 1,600 yards last year with 18 touchdowns in Miami. Also, the fact that we're taking players out of Miami area makes me feel good about other recruits we're chasing too.
Yeah, I think at this point, you don't really have to worry too much about Miami if you're Brent Venables and the Oklahoma Sooners. Also on the recruiting trail, again, all of our recruiting segments here on Locked On are brought to you by LinkedIn. Go to linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege to post your job for free. A couple of OU targets did not choose the Oklahoma Sooners. Mark Yanicher chose the SMU Mustangs, now in the ACC, and Smith Orogbo chose the Red River Rivals, the Texas Longhorns. Talk a little bit about that. It seemed like those were the directions those recruitments were heading at the 23rd hour.
Yeah, Yanicher was one that definitely looked like he was leaning more and more towards SMU. If I'm correct, he either has a relative, I think it was a cousin, or a teammate that ended up at SMU, and he decided to go there as well. And they had been recruiting him really hard. And I know Oklahoma had a lot of interest in him, but Oklahoma's also got a lot of irons in the fire when it comes to linebacker. So I'm not sure exactly how that worked out. But man, I know he was one that we was really looking at, especially because Jaden O'Neal is his quarterback, right, at the school that he's currently at. But Smith Orogbo, that one was so quiet, right? It was a three-headed monster race between Oklahoma, Texas, and Texas Tech. Texas Tech started emerging for a while in a lot of the reports, and you start to think, okay, there's a good chance Texas Tech's going to take it. I think a few predictions even went in, and then he did his visit with Oklahoma. After the Oklahoma visit, then the Texas Tech smoke started to go down, and you're like, okay, so does that mean Oklahoma's got a chance? Does that mean Texas? And then he later said that it was between Oklahoma and Texas, and that was basically the end of it. And so for me, I was hoping to win them. Texas got themselves a good one. Orogbo is a really good edge. He's got a lot of potential. He's still small, but he's one that looks like he has a nice frame to where he adds the weight. He's going to be solid. So he's going to be someone that we're going to have to keep our eyes on once we play against Texas in the future. But they got themselves a good one. Hopefully we can keep working them and maybe flip them later. But if not, I know that we got some other edges that we've had in mind for a while.
Yeah, you're going to lose some recruiting battles to Texas. That's just the way it's going to go. You kind of hate to see this one go the way it went, after, you lost Max Granville to Penn State. You're kind of hoping, I think, maybe to supplement that here, but Oklahoma's going to have opportunities to add edge, but they've already got two really good edge players in this 2025 class, and CJ Nixon and Alexander Shield Knight as well. So even if they don't do anything more, especially with what they did in 2024 with Nigel Smith and Danny Okoye and Wyatt Gilmore, you're looking pretty good at edge for the next few years at the very least. And then there's always transfer portal opportunities in the future as well. One area that is sitting real pretty, and that's the wide receiver position because of one Emmett Jones and what he's done on the recruiting trail, what he's done in development. Let's see where On3 has them ranked going into 2024. Coming up next here on Locked On Sooners. If there's one position group that probably 90% of Oklahoma fans would agree is the strongest position group, it's probably wide receiver. You might have an argument for safety or linebacker, but wide receiver stands kind of head and shoulders above, and no pun intended there with Nick Anderson and Jaden Gibson, but head and shoulders above pretty much everybody else because of the depth that they have and the talent and the production that we've seen out of that group, especially in the 2023 season. I think going into 2023, there were a lot of questions about this group. I think we were still kind of waiting to see what it all was going to look like. I mean, and what they did in 2023 answered all of those questions. Emmett Jones has done fantastic work with that group, developing them. They've done fantastic work off the field, getting ready. And man, this looks like a great group going into 2024. On3 has them as the 6th best wide receiver group in the nation going into the season. And I mean, you could probably nitpick and, be frustrated, but I think what this tells you is you've got a really, really good group, and they're going to show out once again in 2024.
Yeah, Emmett Jones has done a great job of as we've seen, talked about developing the wide receiver room, and On3 posted this. Is from the great Phil Steele in his book that just came out. His basically his college football Bible, as we call it. I've got my copy over here on the side. I've been reading it and prepping myself for this coming season. And, Phil had a nice write-up about Oklahoma's wide receiver room and his expectation. And so I got a little bored, decided to go ahead and run some numbers and look at all the teams on that list for the most part. And with Oregon at number 1, they're bringing back 2,900 yards of receiving. The good thing is they've only got one player coming in as a transfer in Evan Stewart, right? Oklahoma's bringing back 3,100 yards of receiving, and that includes Deion Burks, who brings an additional 629. They're the highest of the top 10 on here of receivers. Oh, actually, they're second of the receivers that are returning, because Colorado decided to bring in 3,800 yards. With that included Wester as well as Shepard, who get you about 1,700 yards by themselves, with all the other players of Travis Hunter and Jimmy Horn or whatnot. But Oklahoma's bringing back the most in the SEC when it comes to returning actual production on the field. 178 catches, 3,166 yards, 27 touchdowns. All coming back for Oklahoma, with Nick Anderson leading the way at 798. So Oklahoma's not going to be a slouch here. Being 6th in the country, I'm kind of questioning why we're underneath USC here, but I guess for them, it's more so because our players are still young. Nick is technically still a young wide receiver. Deion Burks is not, but, he's the transfer. Andrew Anthony's coming off injury. We got to see what he looks like, but he brings back 400 yards. Jaden Gibson is, he's coming on his own at 300-something yards, and Farouk's bringing 694. So for Emmett Jones and this team, yeah, they have a very good chance of being the best wide receiver group in the country, as long as Jackson Arnold gets them the ball.
Yeah. So if we were going to sit here and project who you would think the 3 starters at wide receiver were going to be when they open against Temple, what are your thoughts?
So honestly, I think that your 3 is going to be Nick Anderson on the end. You'll have Deion Burks at the slot, and I think Jaden Gibson's going to take the other side.
I've heard this opinion in some other places as well. And I think, man, it's reasonable, because Jaden Gibson in limited opportunities last year, he really showed out, and he shows he's got that kind of number 1 wide receiver mentality. He reminds me, again, Dallas Cowboys fan here, so those references are going to keep coming. Reminds me a little bit of Des Bryant in that vein, just as somebody that's got that attitude that throw me the ball anytime, any situation, doesn't matter the coverage, doesn't matter who's on me. I'm going to go up and I'm going to make a play. And I think that there's some evidence of Emmett Jones just helping to find that confidence, helping to find that edge, because the Jaden Gibson we saw true freshman season, seemed to not have that kind of confidence, seemed to not have that kind of edge to him. But the dude we saw in 2023 that was dragging defenders to the end zone as he's holding up the number 1 sign, walking into the end zone, that's the dude that's going to have a huge year this year. And while I'm very much one of the bigger Jalil Farouk fans in Sooner Nation, I think he's still going to have a significant role. I can totally see a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2, or 1A, 1B situation between Farouk and Gibson, where they're both playing a lot. You're not going to take Nick Anderson off the field based on what he did last year. Deion Burks gives you an element that neither of those other 2 or 3 guys do, and is just a big, big time playmaker. And so I could very much see kind of a 50% snap count split between Farouk and Gibson, because, hey, Farouk does a lot of really, really nice things for you, but man, Jaden Gibson has a chance to be special, like special. And again, go back and watch some of what he did last year. And that's the stuff that you can't teach. The ability to go up and high point the football, the concentration to win those 50-50 battles, the edge to fight through contact, to fight through those hand fights and win down the field. Like, some of that's used. Now, again, I'm not going to sit here and tell you to sleep on Jalil Farouk, because he does so many things for an offense as a wide receiver, as a runner, as a reverse runner. He helps you on special teams. He's going to have a significant role on this team, but it would not surprise me if week 1 they roll out against Temple and it's Jaden Gibson starting opposite of Nick Anderson in the wide receiver rotation.
Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking, right? That'd be the perfect time to kind of experiment and play around with it. The one thing I've been thinking about Farouk is he will be really good as the second slot receiver, just because he has the ability for separation, while at the same time he's a really good route runner. We just got to get him to hold on to the ball and not let it flop around, which I know that he's worked on that. I know that he has those capabilities. We've watched him be able to do that before. I mean, against Texas, he was high pointing the ball and targeting it perfectly and then catching it on the sideline. So he gave us the game we wanted out of him in that Red River game. So I'm seeing that they see that veteran presence of him. I sense you throw him in there in the slot with Burks, man, they're just going to terrorize defenses at that point. But going against Temple, it's the perfect opportunity to see what it looks like with Gibson and Nick Anderson out there together, because you don't get Anthony back until probably closer to SEC play. I'm sensing Tennessee, probably Auburn on the road, or they may just wait until October and get them right there at the Red River game, because it'd be post-bye week. But it feels like in going into those first games, it makes a lot more sense to go with Nick and Gibson just to play around with it, because I mean, it's Temple, right? I mean, no shade to them, but it's Temple. You may as well see what you got.
Yeah, and both of those guys, Nick Anderson, Jaden Gibson, averaged more than 20 yards per reception last year. Again, Gibson in far more limited, targets and receptions, but still, the dude averaged over 23 yards per reception, had 5 touchdowns on 14 receptions. That's really good. That's a really good touchdown to reception rate. So again, we'll see what Emmett Jones, what Seth Luttrell and Brent Venables decide to do out there at wide receiver, but they've got some great options with Jaden Gibson, with Nick Anderson, Deion Burks, Jalil Farouk, Andrew Anthony coming back from injury, Brennan Thompson, Jaquez Petaway, and that doesn't even include the group of incoming freshmen in Ivan Carrion and Zion Raggins and Zion Kearney and KJ Daniels. Like, it's a dynamic group from top to bottom, and you just wonder how there's going to be enough footballs to go around. But the thing that I love best about this group and about this team is they're bought in, and they're trusting the process. They're trusting the timeline. They're patient. They're doing the work, and they're believing in what Emmett Jones is selling. And that's the beautiful aspect of this, because you've got guys on this team that could go around the country and they could start somewhere else and they could get a lot of playing time, but they're willing to bide their time and, again, trust the process and the developmental process. And that is a beautiful thing to see.
No, I totally agree. That's going to be what determines how this season plays out, right? Then you add in, we'll talk about in the future around the tight end room, you add in that Bauer Sharp there. It's going to be a lot of athleticism on the field. And I love the fact, I want to see the big lineup, though. If there's one lineup I want to see Nick Anderson with Jaden Gibson and Ivan Carrion. Give me all 6'5", 6'4", and 6'6", out there on the field at the exact same time, and then maybe throw like Farouk out there to get you another 6'1", 6'2" guy just to keep the party going. That would be a fun lineup because it's also going to be a nightmare for other teams. It's because how are you going to be able to defend those dudes at that height and the speed that they actually have?
Yeah, because those guys can fly. And that's going to do it for today's episode of Locked On Sooners. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of the show. Subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcasts. We're free and available on all podcast platforms and on YouTube. So hit that notification bell over there to let you know when new episodes drop. Follow the show on Twitter at Locked On Sooners. Also on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook at Locked On Sooners as well. Follow Jay at Unfair Sports, myself at John 9 Williams. But until next time, he's Jay, I'm John. Boomer
Sooner.